Hi, we're back with Joseph Humire, Director, Center for a Secure Free Society. Joseph, thank you for being here again, and let's get into the cultural propaganda that Iran uses to secure the region, and then we can just move from there.
Yeah, so this is important, Debbie, because Iran basically has used a kind of a soft penetration approach to coming into Latin America, and it begins with changing their message. In the Middle East, they use a lot of the Islamic propaganda. They use political Islam as a way to kind of penetrate, even in places where Shias are a minority, or even in the Arab world. And I think Hezbollah is very important for their presence in the Arab world, being that Iran is Persian. But in Latin America, they do that, some of that. They don't get away from that. Their essence is as an Islamic revolution, but they also accentuate other aspects of the Iranian revolution. I'll give you an example. When they come to Latin America, Iran tends to project themselves or portray themselves as a social movement that was lifted up to protect its natural resources, referring to British Petroleum in 1979. And when you sell it that way in Latin America, you get a lot of listeners. So if you talk about social movements and natural resources, well, all the pretty much Marxist and socialist and communist movements in Latin America say, well, that's what our cause is. That's what we've been doing. So it it doesn't come in through the initial entry point, talking about the 12th Imam, Imam Mahdi, and all the religious aspects. That comes later, but that's essentially their selling point. Iran has 11 embassies in Latin America, and each one of these embassies functions mostly like an intelligence center. And what they do is they propagate Shia Islamic cultural centers. A former prosecutor of the AMIA terrorist bombing in Argentina, Alberto Nisman, he had once called them essentially antennas of the Iranian revolution, meaning that they were served, these Islamic cultural centers were serving as intelligence centers to do collection, recruitment, to basically do the studies, country studies of all the countries in which they were located. Today, I would call them cell towers, because they've evolved way beyond just being like an antenna, an intelligence operation, but mostly involved in disinformation. I'll give you one very clear example. One of the biggest disinformation campaigns that Iran has in the world, and particularly in Spanish and Portuguese and Latin America, is to paint the now deceased Quds Force commander Qasem Soleimani as kind of a later day Che Guevara, as kind of a hero that was fighting against terrorism and fighting for justice. And I was in Colombia not too long ago. I'm sorry. I was in Colombia not too long ago, and I was in a public university, which is kind of like a Marxist stronghold. This is where they do a lot of the Marxist indoctrination to some of the people for the FARC and the ELN and some of those terrorist groups in Colombia. And in that university, they had a big mural of Qasem Soleimani, where they were projecting him with the beret, with the bonnet of Che Guevara. So this is the level of propaganda that they're doing.
Wow.
And most Latin Americans don't know anything about Qasem Soleimani. I mean, before he was killed in 2020, they probably never even heard of his name.
Wow, that. So they fool a lot of people into thinking that this guy was like a hero, and in fact, couldn't be anything further from the truth, right?
They call him a social justice warrior.
Yeah, social justice. That sounds very familiar, actually. So they fool the Christians into thinking that they're not, they worship the same God and all those things that they do very well. So that is something that is extremely troubling, given the fact that that they do this with such ease, and they don't seem to. I mean, it's almost like they're really very cunning and very smart people. I mean, we think of them as barbaric, right, because of all the atrocities that they've done, whether it be bombings or beheadings or whatever. But they're very clever individuals, and it's very, So yes.
No, yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think it's really good, important to make, because when I talk to our friends in Latin America to help them understand the sophistication in which Iran operates, because they're very cunning, they have strategy, they have vulnerabilities. I mean, they're not conventionally strong economically or militarily, but because they don't have that conventional strength, they've dominated the arts of asymmetric war. And so what I do with a lot of our Latin American friends is I say, think of this, Shia Islam is about 15% of the Muslim world, right? They're a minority in the Muslim community. Persians are very culturally and ethnically different than Arabs. And anyone that's been in the Middle East knows that
Right.
firsthand.
Right.
And how does the minority of the Muslim world, which Shias, Iran, and Persian, being able to dominate Sunni majority Arab countries, right? Like that. How does that happen? Is because they master that art of penetration, of strategic penetration, using strategic influence. Part of that is cultural influence. I think that's why Hezbollah was so important to them. So just taking that modus operandi, those tactics, and applying them to Latin America was not that hard for them. They understood how to do this, and they've done a very good job at reading essentially the what I call the kind of like the grassroots activists, indigenous groups, youth groups, and co-opting them and bringing them more towards the side of Iran. And this is something I think that many people in Latin America have missed. I mean, I can name you many groups in Latin America that on the face don't seem to have anything to do with the Middle East or Iran, but are either financed, trained, or supported by the Iranian Revolution. The etnocaceristas in Peru, the quebrachos in Argentina, the colectivos in Venezuela, the cocaleros in Bolivia. These are groups that most people listen to, like, who are they? Well, they're local actors that people in those countries know about. But if you do the investigations, you find out that they have tentacles that go all the way back to the Islamic Republic.
That is so interesting. We will be right back with more. We all know that aches and pains come with getting older. I hate it, but it doesn't mean you have to accept it. That's why I want to tell you about Leah from